I'm John McGurk. Welcome to McGurk Performance Cars. Today we're going to be talking about the XJ220. I grew up in Coventry. Okay, so back in the day when these cars were being thought of and designed and dreamt up by a small team of people after hours, it was a hobby project, not a part of Jaguar's production dreams. And so the buzz around Coventry at the time in the late 80s about this car coming out was a huge thing. Then there's the story and the woes of everything that went wrong with it rather than everything that went right with it. And for me, this car represents an era of, you always think of big turboed cars, late 80s, Group B rallying cars that throw flames out the back of them, you know. The excitement of that and the Gordon Gecko, the red braces and all of that era and everything that went with that is what this car kind of is. It was all in that era, wasn't it? And then there was the recession in the early 90s. Everything fell apart, including the car, which began with the lack of a V12 engine that it was supposed to be originally, and lack of four-wheel drive systems and what have you, which was great in terms of the theory of what they wanted to do with the car. But when they wanted to make, you know, the fastest car in the world, all of that extra weight that it was going to carry, it just wasn't going to hit the top speed that it needed to do. So goodbye V12 engine, goodbye four-wheel drive system, and hello V6 engine and rear-wheel drive. And then of course there's the story about, you know, the engine and how that all came about thereafter. But I think that in terms of now today, it's a car that we're all talking about 30 years down the line. It's a success, not a failure, in that respect. So there was roughly 282-ish cars made, but this car's particularly special and rare because it's right-hand drive. And it's finished in Spar Silver with the usual sort of dark grey interior. It's done 7,500 miles from new. It's got a great service history from the word go, which has been with Don Law Racing. It's been a really well-maintained car and has a very important upgrade, which was to do with the brakes. The brakes on the original cars were not very good at all, but Don Law do sort of bigger discs, bigger calipers, much more stopping power, and it's the most important extra to have on one of these cars. Yeah, I think so. But I think cars like this do though, don't they? You know, cars that, because we're all into the whole classic car and what happened 30 or 40 years ago. But there's no doubt that this is the kind of car that if we got in it now and drove it down the motorway, people will come past the car, stop, look at it. We've had people leaning out the windows, trying to take photographs of it when it's on the move, all that sort of stuff. I think in terms of the way it looks, it's a Marmite car for a lot of people, but personally I love it. But a lot of people don't like the way it looks, which is fine. But I'm a big fan, and when you look at cars like this, they've got so much going on with them just to look at. I mean, the headlights, for example, are unique. You know, everyone's always wowed by the way the headlights, where the covers drop down and the headlights are there. And then looking down the side of the car, the big scoops, the dished wheels, everything, every panel on the car is critical and it all does something. You know, there's spoilers under the front of the car, spoilers under the back of the car. There's a huge amount of design and technology that's gone into this car that I don't think people quite appreciate as much as some do. But I think that this car actually ticks a lot more boxes than people give it credit for. I think they've just kind of been shelved a bit. And this was, of course, at that time, what supercars were all about. Something weird and wonderful and extreme that nobody else had, really rare, as in 280 odd cars worldwide, and that was what supercars represented. You know, they were a bit dangerous, incredibly fast, with design at that time. I might have done that. I did, yeah, I had one in 2008. I had a left-hand drive car because I couldn't afford a right-hand drive car. I couldn't find a right-hand drive car. I bought a car that had done 1,000 kilometres that this lovely fella up near Whitby in Yorkshire had owned from new. Yeah, and I kept it for a couple of years. Had a great time with it. A fascinating car to own, fascinating car to drive in terms of. So it's not a point-to-point car, okay? But if you've got a relatively good big bit of road and you can put your foot down, as your speed increases, you can feel the car starting to be squashed onto the floor. You can feel it kind of. You feel like everyone's starting to do this. The car's sinking down. You sink down with it because the panels and everything on it are so big, and the aerodynamic idea of all the panels are doing something to push it onto the floor to make it go that bit quicker. Yeah, and I loved it. It was a great car, and it's what an exciting thing to have. I mean, it's a rare thing to do, you know. Your first reaction when you start one of these engines is that there's a bag of spanners rattling around in the back of the engine bay. It sounds, you're thinking, should it sound like that? Because it just rattles more than you'd feel comfortable with. But as you drive down the road and the engine comes into song, all of that rattling disappears, it all comes together, and you get this huge whoosh at 4,000 RPM and you take off. It feels like a big heavy car. So when you're on these winding, twisting roads, the steering's incredibly heavy. As I said before, you've got to have big brakes. You've got to have a better brake setup than the original cars. But actually, the rest of it's quite drivable given what it is. The clutch control's okay. The gear change is long, and it's quite a long throw. But equally, the ratios for the gears and the diff are really tall. So first, second, and third, and you're cruising into three figures because you don't need to change gear as much as some of the modern day cars where you're going through 8-speed gearboxes and things. But actually, the one thing about it I would say is how comfortable it is, which sounds kind of odd and maybe not what you'd think, but air conditioning works really well. You've got a great hi-fi system in it. The leather seats are really comfortable. Visibility out the front of the car and the side is perfectly fine. But actually, it's quite a nice place to be. So if you wanted to go somewhere in it, which was a long distance run, south of France or what have you, you'd get there with some luggage in the boot of the car. You'd get there in comfortable surroundings, and you'd get there pretty quickly. So it ticks a lot of those boxes, you know. I think driving any car like this on the road, you always feel like a bit of a rock star because it attracts a huge amount of attention. You do feel, I feel a little bit embarrassed actually because it doesn't create a lot of attention, but it just feels mega because you know how it looks. You know the people that appreciate it, they really love it for what it is, and how lucky am I to be in this car, driving this car and having this moment, you know? Personally, yes, I do. I think that everyone's too quick to shoot it down in flames, but they've probably not driven one, not really fallen in love with what it's all about. I think that it's chalk and cheese with an F40. The F40's a go-kart by comparison to this. I've never driven an EB110, I don't know. Diablos, yeah, I have driven those. They're equally dangerous and equally tractor, agricultural gear changes and everything else. But how many of those do you see on the road? And it's just the wow factor because nobody ever sees one, you know. And Lamborghinis now, the modern day Lamborghinis are everywhere. Back in the day, if you had a Diablo SV Roadster or something like that, I mean that's a really cool rare car. But they're never seen. Yeah, it's a really rare car. Apparently. Yeah. Did you notice, by the way, when Martin Brundle was doing that high-speed run, I don't know if you ever looked at the footage of it, but you can see how the panel gaps at the front of the car all start to change. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. And when there was the Top Gear run that was done a couple of weeks ago, and Freddie Flintoff was driving the 220, the same thing happened. And it's fascinating because there was 5 original prototype cars which were designed to do the high-speed runs and all the rest of it. And the panels on the front of the car were made with a slightly different material. And you'll notice how at those high speeds, the panels started to kind of move away and move away around from the car, which is always an interesting point, I think, because the panel gaps on them aren't that great anyway, but, you know. Where would I like future values of the car to be versus where I see them are two different things. They deserve to be better recognised, worth more than they are, I think. And the car market in the last 2 years has gone from being here to being here, and perhaps slightly starting to lift again. They should be worth a lot more money than they are, and I hope that they're worth more money because they deserve to be. They really do. This is £400,000, which I think is about right for today's market. Cars have sold and changed hands for a great deal more than that, but in a different marketplace than we're in today. So I would like to think that it's a good price to pay today, and then hopefully in the future it will be a step up. Fingers crossed. It deserves to be. The one thing that everyone comments on when they look at the car, which I've got to say drives me up the wall, is, oh, that's the car that had the Metro engine. No, it didn't. It didn't have a Metro engine, you know. And it's kind of one of the negative things. You know, the engine that's in this car was a hand-me-down from the XJR10 and XJR11 race car. That's not out of a Metro. Now, there was a story going backwards about how TWR, back in the day, bought from Austin Rover the rights to a V6 engine, which they then took the design of that engine, did things with it, and then built other engines that was then used in race cars, the XJR10, XJR11, and then this was then a hand-me-down of that. But it's always the stigma of, oh, that's got a Metro 6R4 engine in it. Not exactly, not really, you know. It's just me that I listen to that and I think, oh, I wish people wouldn't come out with that. But it's because it kind of detracts from the wonderful, amazing, bulletproof engine that this thing's got, you know. And it is a really, really fast car. I think that a lot of cars that were built in the late 80s and early 90s were ahead of their time, and I think that everyone got away with doing things in terms of performance of engines that you can't do today because of all these laws and regulations from Europe and what have you. So I think that we got away with it would be the way I'd look at it with these cars, because it's a bit like the Concorde conversation about how you could get to New York in 3 hours and now you can't, and all that sort of stuff. And these cars came at that same time where you could achieve things that you can't achieve now in quite such a direct fashion. I think it's probably the right way of saying it.